Paris, July 1392. The air is thick with heat, buzzing with flies. Trumpets split the silence as a royal procession cuts through the cobbled streets. The people cheer. They press against the wooden barricades, craning their necks for a glimpse of their sovereign. At the center, astride a white stallion, rides Charles VI, King of France. He is young, handsome, noble. His armor glimmers like molten silver beneath the noon sun. To his people, he is hope incarnate. The boy crowned at 11, now a man ready to lead. But then, something changes. The king stiffens in his saddle, his eyes glaze over, distant and hollow, like glass catching the light. Suddenly, with no warning, Charles draws his sword, and he attacks. The first strike lands on the neck of his own knight, blood spraying across the crowd. The second strike carves through another man's shoulder. Horses panic, knights scream. Charles rages like a beast, slashing at anyone within reach, foam spilling from his mouth. By the time his horrified guards pull him down, 4 men lie dead, not slain by an enemy, but murdered by their king. A silence falls over Paris, and in that silence, France realizes a truth that will haunt them for decades. Their king has lost his mind. To understand the tragedy of Charles VI, we must return to his beginning. He was born in December 1368, the son of Charles the Fast of France and Joanna of Bourbon. His birth was celebrated with bells, feasts, and prayers. Yet even in those first hours, whispers crept through the palace corridors. His grandfather, King John II, had been volatile and paranoid. His mother's family was infamous for strange fits and melancholia. Madness lurked in the bloodline of the Valois dynasty, and some wondered if this child, swaddled in silk, carried the seed of something cursed. At just 11, Charles was crowned King of France in Reims Cathedral. The crown was heavy on his small head, but he bore it with dignity. Chroniclers called him beautiful, radiant, destined for greatness. He was Charles the Beloved. For a brief moment it seemed true. The France Charles inherited was a kingdom on fire. The 100 Years' War with England had bled the land dry. Plague had carried away whole towns. Famine hollowed the bellies of peasants, and Paris itself reeked, its streets clogged with refuse, its rivers black with waste. The people prayed for a savior king, and young Charles tried to be that king. He surrounded himself with wise advisers. He listened, he acted with generosity. For a short while, he brought stability to his shattered realm, but beneath the polished surface, cracks were forming. At first, it was just exhaustion, long silences, sudden irritability. Then came fevers, strange dreams, whispers of demons in the night. His attendants noted how Charles would tremble, his hands shaking uncontrollably. At times, he seemed to forget where he was or who he was speaking to. By the age of 24, the storm broke. The slaughter of his own knights was the first undeniable proof. The court tried to explain it away. Some said he was cursed by a sorcerer. Others whispered of poison slipped into his wine. But behind closed doors, they admitted what none dared say aloud. Their king had gone mad. Madness came in waves. Some days Charles seemed lucid, even calm. But then the madness returned, stranger each time. One delusion in particular horrified the court. Charles became convinced that he was made entirely of glass. He refused to be touched. He avoided movement, terrified that the slightest bump might shatter him. He ordered iron rods sewn into his clothes to protect him. He sat for hours, motionless, staring into nothing, convinced his fragile body could break at any moment. The most powerful man in France commander of armies, heir to centuries of kings, lived in fear of cracking like a goblet. If there was ever proof that the kingdom itself was cursed, it came in January 1393. It was meant to be a celebration, a masquerade at the Hotel St. Paul. Nobles gathered in glittering gowns and jeweled masks. Music swelled, candles flickered. The king, perhaps desperate for amusement, joined the festivities. He and 5 companions dressed as wild men, costumes coated in pitch and flax, designed to look like shaggy beasts. They danced, chained together, howling and leaping to the delight of the crowd. Then a torch flared too close. In an instant, the dancers were engulfed in fire. The hall erupted in screams as the men burned alive, their bodies writhing in agony. The stench of burning flesh filled the air. The king himself nearly perished, saved only when his aunt threw her gown over him, smothering the flames. 4 men died screaming that night. To the people of Paris it was not a tragedy, it was a sign. God had turned his face from France, and their king was the vessel of his wrath. After the ball, Charles spiraled further into madness. He wandered the palace halls in rags, unwashed, muttering incoherently. At times, he forgot his own name. He insisted he was not king at all. He recoiled from his wife, Queen Isabeau, claiming he did not know her. For hours he would run through the corridors, shrieking like a hunted animal until he collapsed in exhaustion. The throne of France became a grotesque theater. Decisions were made not by the king, but by advisers, uncles, and rivals. Queen Isabeau seized power, cutting deals and selling influence, her name whispered with contempt across Paris. The people pitied their king at first, but pity soon curdled into rage. While the king lost himself to delusion, France fractured. 2 factions rose, the Armagnacs and the Burgundians. Each claimed to rule in the king's name. Each fed off the chaos. Assassinations, riots, betrayals. Civil war bled the kingdom from within. And all the while, Charles sat in his palace, convinced he was glass. But the madness of one man would not remain confined to the palace walls, for lurking in the shadows was John the Fearless, ambitious, cunning, merciless. He saw the king's weakness not as tragedy, but as opportunity. And soon the madness of Charles VI would ignite a civil war so brutal it would tear France apart. Blood on the snow. It is November 1407. Paris sleeps, wrapped in frost. A man rides through the narrow streets, his cloak pulled tight, the sound of his horse echoing off stone walls. His name is Louis of Orléans. Brother of the king, he does not make it home. From the shadows, men leap out, armed with axes and swords. Torches flare, blades crash down. Louis screams once, then falls silent. His skull is split, his body hacked apart, left to bleed in the frozen mud. The assassins vanish into the night. By dawn, all of Paris knows the truth. This was no robbery. This was an execution, and the hand behind it belonged to one man, John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy. Charles VI was alive, but absent. Some days he recognized no one, not even his queen, not even his children. Other days he swore he was dead, a corpse wandering among the living. France could not wait for him to return to sanity. So the wolves tore at the carcass of his throne. 2 men rose above the others, Louis of Orléans, the king's brother, charming, ambitious, notorious for seducing noble women and hoarding wealth. John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy, calculating, ruthless, adored by the commoners for cutting taxes, but despised by nobles for his iron grip. Both claimed to act for the good of the king. Both hungered for total power. The killing of Louis was not hidden. John the Fearless admitted it openly. He declared himself the savior of France. He claimed Louis was a traitor, guilty of sorcery, corruption, and adultery with the queen herself. The city exploded. Nobles gasped in horror. The people surprisingly cheered. They had hated Louis for his greed. Now they saw John as a man of action. But blood never washes clean. Queen Isabeau was trapped between factions. To some, she was the true regent. To others, she was a foreign witch who had corrupted France. Pamphlets painted her as an adulteress, a whore, a traitor who sold the kingdom to the highest bidder. She could not protect her children. She could not protect herself. Her court became a theater of whispers, knives beneath cloaks, poison in goblets, plots at every corner. Paris itself turned into a battlefield. Burgundians roamed the streets, clashing with Armagnacs, the supporters of the murdered Louis. Blood stained the cobblestones. Churches rang their bells not for prayer, but for alarm. The 100 Years' War still raged against England, but France was too consumed with devouring itself. Soldiers who should have fought the enemy instead butchered their neighbors. Madness at the top had spread like a disease, infecting the whole nation. And where was Charles VI during this nightmare? He wandered his palace, lost in visions. Sometimes he declared he was St. George. Other times he believed he was a shepherd tending invisible sheep. At meals, he refused to be served because he believed he had no stomach. He demanded to be buried because he thought he was dead. A kingdom tore itself apart while its king stared at shadows on the wall. The people of France paid the price. Crops failed, taxes doubled. Peasants wandered the roads, skeletal, clutching dead children in their arms. Paris reeked of rot and despair. Prophets and priests declared that France was cursed. Some said it was punishment for the king's sins. Others whispered that demons walked beside him, guiding his madness. And yet, through the chaos, John the Fearless thrived. He tightened his grip on Paris. He posed as protector of the people. His enemies fell one by one, but ambition breeds enemies. And France had not yet spilled enough blood. By the 1410s, the kingdom was split clean in two. The Armagnacs, rallying around the blood of murdered Louis. The Burgundians, marching under John the Fearless. Families turned on one another. Cities chose sides. Brothers fought brothers. The 100 Years' War became a backdrop, a distant thunder. The real war was now French against French. England, watching from across the Channel, saw its chance. In 1415, Henry V landed in Normandy. His armies swept through France, crushing everything in their path. And at Agincourt, French pride shattered. Thousands of French knights fell, trampled in mud, slaughtered like cattle. The flower of French nobility was cut down in a single day. And their king? Charles d'Austria, lost in madness, could not even comprehend the disaster. But France was not yet finished, because out of the smoke and ruin a voice would rise. A girl, uneducated, barefoot, carrying no sword but the fire of conviction. She claimed she heard angels. She claimed God had sent her to save France. And for a brief, miraculous moment, the mad king would wear his crown again. Her name was Jane. The world would remember her as Joan of Arc. The year is 1429. Inside the crumbling halls of Chinon Castle, the King of France sits slouched on his throne. His crown tilts forward. His eyes wander, blank and distant. He mutters to himself, sometimes about angels, sometimes about shadows that only he can see. This is Charles VI, the Mad King. The court around him reeks of perfume and fear. Nobles whisper, priests argue, France is dying, and their king is a ghost of a man. Then the doors creak open. A girl enters, barefoot, mud-stained, 17 years old. Her hair is cropped short like a boy's. She does not bow. She does not tremble. Her eyes blaze like fire, and she says, "My name is Jeanne. God has sent me, and I will deliver France." The court erupts in laughter. Some sneer, others jeer. But the king, the broken king, leans forward. For the first time in years, his eyes focus. A mad king meets a peasant girl who hears voices, and history shudders. By the late 1420s, France was a corpse picked clean by vultures. The English had seized vast swaths of land. The Burgundians betrayed the crown, allying with the invaders. Paris, once the jewel of Christendom, lay in foreign hands. The Armagnacs, loyalists of the crown, held only scraps of territory. The treasury was empty. The army was broken. France was on the verge of extinction. And at the center of this ruin was Charles d'Aix, alive but lost. His mind flickered in and out like a candle in a storm. He was unfit to rule. His court was divided. His people despaired. Then, in the village of Domremy, a teenage girl began to hear voices. She said they came at noon, when the church bells rang. At first they were faint, like whispers in the wind. Then they grew stronger, clearer, voices of saints, of Michael the Archangel, of Catherine and Margaret. They told her she was chosen. They told her France could still be saved, but only if she, an illiterate peasant girl, led the armies herself. It was absurd. It was impossible. And yet, in an age when demons and angels were as real as flesh and blood, it was believable enough to spread like fire. When Joan of Arc arrived at Chinon, the court mocked her, but she passed every test they threw at her. Priests interrogated her for weeks. Scholars tried to expose her as a fraud. Instead, they found conviction that shook them. Finally, she was brought before the king. Charles VI sat silent, his mind fraying. He no longer commanded respect, no longer inspired fear. Yet Joan walked straight to him, and according to legend, she whispered a secret into his ear, something no one else could have known. The king wept. For the first time in years, hope flickered. Armed with nothing but conviction, Joan rode with the French army to Orleans. The soldiers scoffed at her at first, but when she entered their camp, they stopped swearing. They stopped visiting prostitutes. They followed her like disciples. Under her banner, France fought with new fury. She charged into battle, arrows whistling around her, lifting morale where there had been none, and miraculously, victory came. In 1429, the siege of Orleans was broken. The English, invincible for decades, were forced to retreat. The French roared with belief. They called her La Pucelle, the maid. From Orleans, Joan pushed further. She led the king's armies from one victory to another. Towns opened their gates. Soldiers rallied. The tide was turning, and at last the crown was restored. In Reims Cathedral, Charles was crowned King of France. Trumpets blared, bells tolled, incense filled the air. The people wept with joy. But there was an irony so bitter it could choke a man. Charles was crowned not because of his strength, but because of a peasant girl who claimed to hear voices. The mad king wore his crown again, but it was borrowed glory. Joan's rise could not last. She was too strange, too dangerous, too powerful for those in the shadows. In 1430, she was captured by the Burgundians and sold to the English. The trial that followed was a grotesque theater of fear. Accused of heresy, witchcraft, even dressing like a man, she was condemned. Charles did nothing. The king she had saved abandoned her. On May 30th, 1431, Joan of Arc was led to the stake in Rouen. Crowds gathered, priests shouted. She asked for a cross, and a soldier handed her one made of sticks. As the flames rose, she cried out the name of Jesus. Witnesses swore they saw a dove fly from the fire. Her ashes were cast into the Seine. The girl who had given France its only hope was gone. The mad king remained as broken as ever. But fate was not done humiliating him, for the death of Joan was not the end of France's suffering. It was the beginning of its final collapse. And as the mad king drifted deeper into delusion, the English tightened their grip. Soon, the crown of France itself would be signed away by a king who no longer even remembered he was king. The year is 1420. In the Cathedral of Troyes, banners of England hang beside the lilies of France. The air is heavy with incense, but it cannot mask the stench of betrayal. On the altar, parchment lies waiting. The Treaty of Troyes, by its ink, France will die. Charles VI, the king who believes himself made of glass, signs away his crown. His daughter is married to the English king Henry V. His own son, the Dauphin, is declared illegitimate, disinherited. The crown of France will pass to England, and the man who agrees to this is not a traitor, not a foreign invader, not a usurper. It is the King of France himself. Charles VI was no longer a ruler. He was a shadow, wandering his palace halls, speaking to ghosts, forgetting his name, his children, his throne. Sometimes he refused to wash or eat, convinced he was dead. Other times he declared himself made of glass, begging courtiers not to touch him. He wore iron rods sewn into his clothes, afraid of shattering. The most powerful crown in Europe had become a cage for a broken mind, and France paid the price. In 1418, Burgundian soldiers stormed Paris. Blood filled the streets as Armagnacs were slaughtered, corpses piled in gutters, the Seine choked with bodies. The people, hungry and desperate, turned savage. Charles VI, powerless, remained locked away. The city that had once cheered his coronation now cursed his name. The English marched into Paris soon after, and the lilies of France, proud and defiant for centuries, fluttered beside the flag of St. George. In his final years, Charles drifted in and out of reality. He would stare for hours at flames, muttering prayers to saints. He accused his servants of conspiring to shatter him. He no longer recognized Queen Isabeau. He mistook his children for strangers. His meals were left untouched. When the court gathered, the throne of France often stood empty, while their king wandered barefoot through the palace gardens, talking to the wind. France had no ruler, only a ghost. The Treaty of Troyes was the ultimate humiliation. France was not conquered by the sword, but by the trembling hand of its own king. To the English, it was victory beyond imagination. To the French, it was betrayal beyond forgiveness. The Dauphin Charles, the king's own son, was cast aside, branded a bastard. He wandered the Loire Valley with scraps of loyal followers, mocked as the King of Bourges. The Valois dynasty, centuries old, seemed finished, and yet history has a way of twisting. On October 21st, 1422, Charles VI of France finally died. He was 53. The people of Paris did not mourn. The bells tolled, but no tears fell. To most, he was not Charles the Beloved, but Charles the Mad, the king who had delivered France into the hands of its enemies. He was buried at Saint-Denis. His tomb was simple, almost forgotten. His crown passed, as the treaty demanded, to the infant Henry VI of England. For a moment, France and England shared a king. It should have been the end, but it wasn't, because the Dauphin, disinherited and despised, refused to vanish. He fought on, he gathered allies, and decades later his line reclaimed the crown. The Valois survived. France survived, not because of Charles VI, but in spite of him. And Joan of Arc, burned at the stake, ashes scattered in the river, became a saint in memory, her fire burning long after her death. She gave France something the Mad King never could: faith. The story of Charles VI is not just the story of one man. It is the story of how madness at the top can poison an entire nation. France did not fall to England because of armies. It fell because its king could no longer rule. A mind shattered into pieces dragged a kingdom down with it. The Mad King believed he was made of glass, and in a way, he was right. For when he shattered, so did France.